Welcome to UNAM Chicago's CAFÉ EXPRESSO, a space for bilateral conversations with people from all walks of life. Tune in to Spanish Public Radio and follow us on social media. And now your host, Alberto Foncerrada.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of CAFÉ EXPRESSO. I'm your host, Alberto Foncerrada, and this is a program from UNAM Chicago in alliance with Spanish Public Radio. You can also find us as a podcast in Spotify. Today is a very special day. I have a good friend of mine who agreed to do this interview, Rob Paral. He's a writer, an analyst, a communicator, a demographer, with many, many years of experience. I think I met Rob probably 10 years ago in my first round here in Chicago. He's an expert on immigration, integration, and he knows a lot about the Mexican community. Welcome, my friend. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. I'm glad to be here. So we're going to talk about Mexicans in Chicago.
That's right. Yes, I thought it would be a great idea. I recently did a program on Chicago and Mexico, the Mexico City. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary of sisterhood. But let's talk about Mexicans in Chicago, all Mexicans. You know a lot about this. You're a data guy. And so tell us a little bit about
I'm a data and numbers guy, so I'll talk about data and numbers and stuff. Let me start off by saying this, that, Chicago would be lost without Mexicans. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The city of Chicago and the metropolitan area that Chicago is in, a group of counties here in Illinois, and then Illinois, the state, have really had trouble and have been struggling to maintain population. Because a lot of the native-born people move to Texas or Florida for reasons I'll never understand, but that's what they want to do. They leave our area, and really the key to maintaining the population and really in a lot of ways economy and just the overall vibrancy of the region has been immigration, and especially Mexican immigration. We'd be lost without it. It keeps our population up, keeps our neighborhoods up. Mexicans, have been a growing percentage of all the workers in the metropolitan Chicago area. So one of the ways to understand Chicago and Mexicans is to realize how badly we need Mexicans and how much they have meant to us. And just a real quick bracketed kind of a thing is, our history here in Chicago goes way back with Mexicans. We had Mexican immigrants coming here around 1900. We had Mexican communities get established on the south side of Chicago by the steel mills in the early decades of the 20th century. So we have this long history, and it's always been changing. And right now we're in the middle of a whole bunch of new kind of changes in terms of who the Mexicans are in Chicago.
Wow, that's yeah, I know that Mexicans go a long way. And why don't you walk us through a little bit about that journey of Mexicans here?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about let's do. We're going to talk about 120 years in 40 seconds, or something like that. So Mexicans and the Midwest. Actually, what happens really is during the Porfiriato in Mexico, as you know, there were a lot of railroads built connecting the interior of Mexico to the United States. And that's a big part of the story because it allowed transportation of human beings and people to move north. And so what was the leading city of railroads in the United States in the 19th century? It was Chicago. All railroads went to Chicago. So way back at the end of the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, we began this movement of people northward, often ending in Chicago. And then at the same time, it's not just railroads, but we had this exploding manufacturing sector in Chicago. Chicago used to be this big tough city full of factories. It's not anymore, but that happened a lot. And then, as you know, during the First World War and the Second World War, there were enormous labor shortages in the North. Mexicans began to fill a lot of these really key jobs in Chicago and Illinois and the Midwest. So all of that's going on, and the history is very interesting. It has its ups and downs, as you know, very, very sadly and outrageously. In the 1930s, during the American Depression, many Mexicans and their children born here were rounded up and sent out of the country against their will. It was really one of the awful pages in American history.
Even some Americans, I think, were, I mean...
the children of the immigrants were U.S. citizens by birth. And as you know, a lot of Mexicans have been here for many generations in the United States. So that's part of the story too, is, we want your labor and we need you. Oh, now we're done with you. We're going to throw you out. That was the story of the 1930s. But really then what gets us a little closer to today is this process that starts happening after the Second World War, especially in the 1960s, because a couple of things happen. As you know, in the 1960s, I think it was 1965, I think, when we ended the Bracero program. The Bracero program was this program that allowed Mexican agricultural workers especially to legally work in the United States. And that had been in place since 1945, I think. Well, that led to a lot of people coming north and having relationships and lives and children and families here. And then we just end it in 1965. And the same thing that happens in 1965 is we change completely all the immigration rules. We developed this new system of immigration in the United States in 1965. In some ways, it was a good change because it brought us diversity of immigration. It recognized different kinds of immigrants. But what it did was it penalized Mexico. And what I mean is that in the 1960s, 65 and some other years, we cut off the Bracero program, but then we begin to limit other kinds of legal immigration from Mexico. And we do this at the same time that we're increasingly using and needing, from the North American perspective, needing labor, right? So you start in the 1960s, a lot of undocumented immigration because people have no visas available to them. So we begin that process. But Mexican immigration to Chicago is certainly not just a story about people who don't have status. There's also huge legal immigration, people who do get visas to stay with their family. So all those changes start in the 1960s. Then I'm going to jump forward to the 1980s, because if you're sitting here as a demographer in the 1980s in Chicago, you're looking at these numbers. This is before the digital era. You looked at numbers literally on a piece of paper, like I am now looking at my hands, and you were going, "Oh my God, I can't believe the growth of Mexican immigrants coming to Chicago in the 1980s." I mean, it was just amazing. The numbers, the total immigration in a given year in the 1980s to Illinois was, and the 1990s was reaching like 75,000 people a year, and about 2/3 of them from Mexico. 40, 50,000 people a year coming here. It was a huge boom in the 80s and the 90s. And in a minute, I'll talk a little bit about what that really meant for the neighborhoods and where do people live.
Exactly. Yeah.
But basically, I'm fast forwarding now. You get to the economic crisis the United States had around the end of the Bush administration, around 2007. And starting around 2007, 2010, things really change. The undocumented immigration from Mexico really just goes way down. Very, very few people arrive here anymore in an undocumented status. Many people who are undocumented have been leaving. So the number is declining of undocumented Mexicans. And then the legal immigrants from Mexico still are arriving here, but there are so few channels available for people to use those legal channels that we're getting a lot fewer Mexican immigrants now in Illinois. And it's really a bit of a crisis for us because we are a state and a city and a region that has depended, as I said, we've depended on Mexicans, not just for labor and things, but also just for pure population stability. Because, if you look at the average white person, Anglo person like me in Chicago, we all know somebody who has moved to Florida or Colorado or Texas or California. That has been the process. People have been leaving this part of the country for a long time. So anyway, I just gave you kind of I said it was going to be 40 seconds. I think it was maybe 5 minutes of Mexican immigration history to Chicago. But then I thought I'd talk a little bit about Mexicans, like where they live in the city. And
exactly. I was going to say that because I remember you talking about, I don't know, one of your studies, multiple studies, I remember you talked about this trend of some of the immigrants spreading out in Illinois, kind of like some of them leaving Chicago and going into the suburbs and Waukegan and all these places. And yeah, tell us a little bit about this.
So if you went back in the 1980s when this kind of big boom of Mexican population took off, at the beginning, the whole story of Mexicans in Chicago was about a few, well, generally about a few key neighborhoods in Chicago, in the city of Chicago. Urban, highly urban, very old neighborhoods where the buildings were built in the 19th century. Narrow lots and streets. The Chicago we maybe know when we watch television. That was where the Mexican population was in the 1980s. Those of you who are familiar with Chicago, you know Pilsen, you know La Villita. That was the core of it on the west side of Chicago. But then you jump forward to today, the majority of Mexicans in our region don't live in Chicago anymore. The story is suburbs. Mexicans, both immigrants and Mexican Americans, if you will, born here, people live in the suburbs.
The suburb, when you talk about the suburbs, you don't mean the metropolitan area. Is that outside the metropolitan area of Chicago?
So yeah, when I say suburbs, in Chicago, we have what we call a metropolitan area of about 9 counties. It's a big area. There's 9 million people.
9 million, exactly.
From the Wisconsin border down to the Indiana border, and out from Chicago, out from the lake about 100 miles west it goes. That's our metro area. And the city of Chicago is kind of in the middle. And everything that's not the city, I'm calling suburbs.
Okay.
Now, at first, you go back a couple of decades, most of the Mexican population was just outside of Chicago in these near suburbs. Those of you who know the Chicago area know that I'm talking about Cicero. I'm talking about Melrose Park.
Aurora.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm talking about these suburbs that were real close to the city of Chicago because people just moved barely outside the city. Then you go more towards the 90s and you start these populations of Mexicans really growing rapidly in these farther out suburbs like Aurora, like Waukegan, which is north of Chicago, about 30 miles towards the Wisconsin border. It's got a huge Mexican population. Joliet, another city southwest of Chicago, really far from the city. We're not talking Chicago anymore. We're talking about suburbs. We're talking about living with a car. You're not walking to school or work. You're living like all Americans in the suburbs live. I live in a city, so I can't say exactly how people in the suburbs live, but it's very different here in the city where I can touch my neighbor's house with my arm, leaning out my window. But I wanted to say, and then north of Chicago, I mentioned Waukegan. So it's an old city, very large Mexican population. I think it's about. I know that, for example, there is a majority Latino, although basically everyone's Mexican. We could talk about that. When I say Latino, when I say Latino in the Chicago suburbs, I'm really talking Mexican, about 90%.
Right.
It's changing a little bit. We're getting more Central Americans and South Americans, but I was going to say a little bit about. Let's go north of Chicago, about 30 miles. There's a city called Waukegan. It's an old city. It's had affordable housing. Had a lot of factory jobs, big Latino population there. But you go about 10 or 15 miles west of that, and still near the Wisconsin border, you're way out in the suburbs. You're way out in these small suburbs in an area called the Round Lake area. There's a city called Round Lake. There's another one called Round Lake Beach. There's another one called Round Lake Park. They're all together very large Mexican populations. One of my favorite Latino social service agencies in the world is out there. It's called Mano a Mano.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and they work with the Latino population, the Mexican population, to help immigrants and people with child needs and things.
Wonderful.
They are way out in the suburb. You just drive a few minutes away from them and there's cornfields.
Exactly.
So, the days are over when Mexicans in Chicago were an urban population. That's done. That's just about a third of the population. And in fact, the Mexicans in Chicago, the numbers are declining. They're declining, fewer and fewer. A couple of things going on there. Some of the old neighborhoods like La Villita, the little village, it's declining. A lot of reasons. Some of it's just that, guess what? Immigrants get old like anyone else, and their kids grow up and move away.
Right.
Americans like to think that immigrants never get old. You know that? Anglos think immigrants are always young, males. Well, guess what? They're human beings like the rest of us, and they've raised their children here, and their kids went to college, and their kids have decided to go live anywhere else, maybe, right? They leave the city. So there's that kind of thing going on.
Yeah. Give me a second, Rob, before you go on. For those of you,
I am going on.
For those of you who just joined in, I'm talking with Rob Paral. He's a writer, an analyst, a communicator with many years of experience working in community development, human services, immigrant integration. He's also a demographer and a public policy consultant. Yeah, please go on. This is
all right. Yeah. So what are other couple of key things to know about Mexicans? Well, back in the city of Chicago, just for a minute,
yes,
there's really an enormous growth of Mexicans on the south side of Chicago, southwest, where people are living in. I don't know if you know the southwest side of Chicago has a very unique flavor. Those of you who are lucky enough to be here or visit here, it's an area of kind of small little brick houses. Brick house, with an alley in the back and a street in the front, and the houses are about 10 feet apart, and everything is neat and tidy and just kind of the dream of the working person. And I talk about this with a little bit of emotion because that's where I grew up myself.
Okay.
You know, these were the neighborhoods and the areas where working class people could buy a house and invest in their house and see their children,
the Southwest,
go off to college.
Okay.
Southwest side, yeah, there are neighborhoods called Garfield Ridge, the areas around Midway Airport, etc. There's a lot of Latino politicians getting elected in that area.
I remember whenever I used to get homesick, I would love going there just to get like a.
Yeah, in another conversation, we'll talk about how all this Latino population has translated into politics, because on the southwest side of Chicago, we have this growing a group of like-minded progressive Latino politicians. And at the head of them all, of course, is Jesus Garcia, who has been fighting for his community in that area for decades now. But he has helped to elect mostly all Mexican Americans to alderman positions in the city.
Oh yeah. He has done wonderful work. Chuy Garcia from Congress, he has done a lot. And
Congress, he's carrying on to Congress what he started fighting for in neighborhoods in Chicago 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
So there's this growth of Latino political power. So I'm trying to say on the southwest side of Chicago now. Along with all this population.
And I think all these people who are pushing for that make Chicago what it is. I mean, Chicago, as I was reading from one of your reports, is the top-ranked city in the U.S. for policies that promote immigrant integration. And that's another topic that I wanted to talk about with you. I know that in September of 2020, you released a report, A Global Welcome, Metro's Chicago Approach to Immigrant Inclusion. That was a fascinating work because you covered a lot. And you actually, this was in the midst of the pandemic when you released this report, right?
Yeah, correct. So there's a couple amazing things about Chicago and also the state of Illinois and the county of Cook, which is that we are probably the friendliest part of the country for immigrants in some ways. And what I mean is we have a lot of state and local laws and policies that are very forward-looking, very positive about immigrants. I'll give you one example. Just 2 Mondays ago, the state of Illinois legislature voted to provide health care for undocumented older persons as young as 55 years of age. Very few states in the country are looking at this kind of thing. And there's a long list of policies. It goes way back 20 years ago. We gave driver's licenses to people who didn't have legal status. We give the children who don't have legal status can go to Illinois universities and pay tuition as someone
tuition,
yeah, legal status. There's a long list of that in Chicago and Illinois, and a lot of it. This is kind of going back to what you mentioned. A lot of it comes from this growth of Latino political power, which has promoted these things. And in the state legislature, you have a group of Latino elected officials and allies that have been promoting this kind of thing. And it's amid all the immense political problems facing the United States right now, there is a good story of what political organizing and immigrant engagement can do to make a place help people's lives.
Absolutely, particularly last administration, during the Trump administration, it just felt so good to be here. Like Chicago is a sanctuary city. It just felt safe, and in spite of like all the attacks and all these things, But
Chicago is a very progressive place in a lot of ways. It's not perfect. We can find lots of things wrong, but there's a lot.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you a story. I was at the lakefront the other day, and a reporter showed up to talk about the beach there, and they were from Fox News, right? They're from Fox is very provocative subject, right? Fox News is very anti-immigrant, anti-Latino, I would argue, and we could go on about that. But anyway, all the people at the beach refused to talk to the Fox reporter. Everybody said, no, thank you.
Okay.
So that's the kind of place Chicago is. That's the kind of place Chicago is. There's a lot of awareness and a lot of political progressivism in the city. So, yeah, so these are some things I thought I would share with you today.
Well, yes, I mean, we can talk about so many things, and I'm sure this is going to be a first of many because it's fascinating talking with you about different issues. We definitely got to talk about politics and where we're headed in local politics one of these days. But I think this is good for today. I really appreciate you coming over, Rob.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking again soon. Thank you so much. And again, everybody, my name is Alberto Foncerrada. I am your host of Café Expresso. Until next time.
All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.